Hey, I hear that. People can hear me while the theme music's going on? Oh, it's done. Oh, you were playing the thingamabobber. That was the replay thingamabobber. Or sound. Oh, okay. So this is awkward. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Trinity Talk Live, water cooler conversation from a Christian perspective. I'm Ken Coughlin.
And I'm Jessica McAllister.
And welcome to the best start of the show we've ever had. Now, we've had some doozies. Like, remember the Lost Cursor? We had the Lost Cursor episode. That's what we're going to call that one. This one, I wasn't paying any. Okay. Let's be honest. Most of the time when we have awkward starts to this program, it's because I'm not paying attention. Okay, I mean that is. Typical.
I mean, it's happened to me too. Let's be honest. I have had very awkward starts to shows that I have been supposed to begin. Yeah, so I know the feeling.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm not alone in there. So, but the Lost Cursor was. I'm still. That one has a name now. I mean, it's ingrained in history. The Lost Cursor episode. Yeah. So anyway, hey, welcome to Trinity Talk Live. I think I already said this, water cooler conversation from a Christian perspective. If this is your first time joining us, yeah, that's pretty much how the show starts every time. We usually have something awkward happening. But what the purpose of the show is that we are here, just like the byline says, to talk about the same types of things that people out there in the world are talking about around the proverbial water cooler. So sometimes our stories have a particularly Christian bent. Often they don't, but what we try to bring that's unique to them is the fact that we are talking about them from a Christian perspective. We know there's no shortage of places you can go to online to get people's opinions about this news story or that news story, but sometimes it is difficult to hear a uniquely Christian perspective on those stories. Does that mean we're some types of Christian experts? Well, she is, but I am not.
I'm going to say that straight off. No, not an expert, but will do my best.
But then that's all we try to do. It's like, are you going to agree with us? Not necessarily. Are we going to agree with each other? Maybe not. But what we do try to exemplify, number one, is that we are at least considering Christian principles when talking about these stories. And hopefully we're going to demonstrate how you can talk about them with each other in the way Christians should talk about things with each other, to show that, these even the hot topics of the day, it is possible to talk about them politely and respectfully. So, hey, speaking of talking about these topics, we'd like to invite anybody who's watching us live right now to participate. And the way you do that is we are live currently on the Trinity Joppa YouTube channel and the Trinity Joppa Facebook page. You can comment in the live chat in YouTube or on the comment section on the Facebook Live video. And if again, this is if you're watching us live, 5:30 on Wednesdays, and I have them running right here. It's a little bit awkward because I'm watching myself 30 seconds ago on my screen right in front of me. But I have them right here so I can see when comments are made in either the YouTube chat or the Facebook live stream. And we can address them here on the show. So if you have any questions, comments, agree with us, disagree with us, please join in, put them in there, and we will go ahead and we will, as soon as we have a little break, we're not going to stop in the middle of a sentence or anything, but because that would be rude, Jess. Okay. See, you guys, you don't know the conversations before we went on the air. Inside joke.
I was instructed not to be rude. That's a rule.
All right, now you're making me sound like a total jerk.
It's a good rule. Don't be rude. Got it. Good one.
So anyway, please comment in the live chat, put a comment on Facebook, and as soon as we have a natural break in the conversation, we'll read your comments live here on the air and address any questions, comments, responses, things like that. So with that being said, I think I've hit everything, all the preliminaries. So shall we talk about our first story of the day?
Let's do it.
Now, this is kind of interesting. Our first story is actually something that those of you that are watching that are from Trinity here, Pastor Jay actually mentioned in the worship service this past weekend in his sermon. And I admit I was kind of out of touch this weekend because, the first week of school was getting ready to start and I had a million things going on. And I didn't even know about it. I didn't know what he was talking about when he mentioned it.
It was news to me too.
But here's basically what happens. This was in Georgia, the headline of this particular article, and no shortage of articles you can find about it, but it's almost 40 missing children rescued, 9 sex traffickers arrested in major Georgia sex trafficking bust. And essentially, there was it was called Operation Not Forgotten, which spanned 20 different counties in or around the Atlanta metropolitan area down in Georgia. And U.S. Marshals spent 2 weeks trying to hunt down and search for missing children in that region. In total, they were able to recover 26 endangered children were recovered, and another 13 missing children were found. And they found children in multiple counties. Let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, at least more than 4, because it says among several others, major counties. So this wasn't just on one isolated place where they went and found all these children. This was a major operation where they were able to go in multiple areas and find them and rescue these children. Now, we use the term rescue, but unfortunately, of course, what is almost certain in the circumstances that most, if not all, of these children, according to authorities, had already likely been the victims of some type of physical abuse, sexual abuse, or some other kind of abusive situation. So they are now the challenge that's facing them down there in Georgia is, basically trying to set all these kids up with the mental health, the psychiatric, psychological assistance, counseling that they're going to need, considering what they've been through. And Pastor Jay, speaking of Pastor Jay, he actually sent me something just earlier today, because one indication in this article was that this wasn't the only one, that there were other operations like this going on around the country. So far, other ones had not been as successful, if at all. Well, apparently, just earlier today, it was reported, a news release from the U.S. Marshal Service reports that more than 24 missing children were found in Ohio. So it seems like there's clearly something going on with U.S. Marshal Service right now that maybe we're just starting to see the tip of the iceberg on. But anyway, so what you didn't know about this either, I guess, on Sunday.
Sunday was the first time I had heard about this recovery of all these children, and I have had some information in understanding how dire and terrible the situation in our country is regarding sex trafficking. So it's my response to hearing this is it feels like a tug of war inside. I have a visceral response to hearing about this happening. I mean, my stomach becomes upset even just thinking about it. And I think there's a lot of joy in them being recovered, but then there's this feeling of just fear and incredible sadness that this does appear to be something that is systemic and really, really prevalent and happening, and like you mentioned before, it's great that they were able to be recovered, but now what does the future look like for them? And that, it seems like that is complicated, and it's going to be something that is going to be layered in its approach. And I can only imagine the trauma that a child would have to undergo, and now the treatment for recovery that follows that. So there's a lot of joy, but I think my response is, and coming from my experience as a mother, and having the background I have in the therapeutic realm, it's not limited to just this is happy ending. There's a lot going on, and there's a lot of layers, and there's a lot that in the future holds that we don't know yet. So I think that's the most troubling thing to me, is that it's very complicated and very wounding for so many reasons.
Yeah, I think I always think that, because we live in a culture that is, we're an entertainment culture. We like to be entertained, and you go out to the movies, and, the movies has, maybe you see a movie about somebody being kidnapped, and the hero has to go and rescue them, and the end of the movie, the hero comes to save the day and rescues the person from the horrible kidnappers, and then you're left with this perception, and then they live happily ever after. And so we almost have this mentality of, yay, this is the end of the story, you know, and what a happy ending. And this isn't the end of the story. This is, you know, this is actually one of the early chapters. I mean, it's a great chapter, because certainly we are thrilled that they were rescued. But I do think that, you know, especially from talk about from a Christian perspective, we really need to have an outlook of, okay, what next? You know, now what can we do next to help these people? And in a lot of areas, and I don't know what things are like in these counties where these kids were rescued from. I don't know if they have the resources to handle this dramatic increase in volume right away. And so, you know, I'd be, you know, looking to churches, especially that are down there in that Atlanta, Georgia area, to say, okay, what can you do to help? And I don't want to sound like, you know, tooting our own horns or anything like that, but I just use this as an example. You know, we here at Trinity, at the Trinity Lutheran Christian School, the school that's attached here to our church, we always call it, it's our biggest ministry here at the church, just launched, Mary Kate, what's it called? The Trinity Success Center, is that right?
The Student Success Center.
The Student Success Center?
Yes, it's a lot of
yeah, but basically it's, you know, schools have counselors, and, you know, we have too, but Mr. Gast, our head of school, kind of spearheaded an effort this year because he recognized, just with COVID alone, with, you know, what a lot of people were going through, the need that, you know, for additional services. And so we've actually contracted with an outside agency, is my understanding, to come in and provide even additional services, not just to the students, but to their families as well. And so if you can get that kind of infrastructure in place, are there churches in this area, in Atlanta, in Ohio, that might be able to step up and say, hey, we're here, let us help? That's kind of what I see the calling of the church to be in something like this.
Yeah. Well, and it goes, you're speaking to what essentially is, well, the older I get and watching my children grow, you know, that fundamental truth that needs to be there, that must come from the church, and teaching what the Word of God says to us about, you know, our worth and where we come from and how we're loved, and that core piece needs to be established really early, and how childhood is so important in that sense of being able to instill and teach what it means to find your identity in the Lord, and not in outside things. Even, you know, as loving as your parents can be, your parents are human beings that are going to wound you. And I mean, I heard Beth Moore say in a podcast recently that she jokes around with her kids that she'll pay for their therapy when they grow up because they can count on it. You know, parents are going to make mistakes, and are going to have missteps and communicate things that aren't true, even in the midst of their incredible love. And so, you know, how important it is to have that concept of the core of you and where you come from, and that you're made in the likeness of God. You know, that is something that is shown to you as a young child and reinforced as you grow, because there's so much in this world, and Satan salivates over every opportunity to pick away at that, of, you know, convincing each and every one of us that we're not worthy, and that we are, you know, we don't just make mistakes, but we are a mistake, you know. And so I can only imagine the messages that these children are facing in response to what they've gone through, of what they're worth, really, where they really find it, and what they've experienced, and how that's translated into the way that they feel about themselves. And so the church being so important in their recovery, it's so needed, because there are, you know, wonderful strategies that the professionals in the world that can give us, that can, you know, dovetail some amazing things that you know, in our lives, but the true foundation of recovery is going to be where they find that love and acceptance from their maker. So, you know, the hope is that that's going to be present for them in the long run. You know?
And I think we're called to be ambassadors of Christ. And let's face it, if you were to go ask people who not even people who've been through something like this, but just, the number one reason why people give for leaving the church, if they were to give a reason at all, is the problem of evil, is that they see, the evil that's out there in the world. Well, put yourself in the shoes now of someone who has had this kind of firsthand experience of evil.
Yeah.
And ask yourself, okay, now what's that person now thinking about God? Well, there's certainly going to be many of them that are, not all. There's been some great stories through history about people who've actually found strength to persevere through stuff like this by their faith in God. But there are certainly people who start to question. And if our job is to be ambassadors of Christ, then how do you help reassure people that God does love them even when they've been through an experience like this? And it's by, like what I was saying before, it's by asking what's next, by being there for what's next, by, showing them at a time when they desperately need to see love, and very patiently, because, there's going to be a lot of resistance probably at first, and maybe more than at first, maybe for quite an extensive period of time. But to model that love for them and to be there for them, to be that support system for them so that they can see Christ's love through us. And that's not an easy thing to do. I mean, anybody that's been a caregiver for someone who's been struggling with any kind of emotional situation like that knows that it's obviously draining on the person who's going through it. It can also be very draining on the caregivers that are trying to provide that, but it's what we're called to do. So.
Absolutely.
All right.
Pray that this is the beginning of lots of wonderful new things that God shows himself through
them, absolutely. And pray that, this is, I was encouraged to see Pastor Jay's message to me earlier that there is, right on the coattails of this one, or right on the heels of this one, here's another incident in Ohio that just makes me think that there's a larger thing going on here nationwide, I think, with the U.S. Marshals. But it just shows you, like you said before, it's like the prevalence of it the prevalence of this kind of evil is shocking.
In a country like ours,
yeah,
where our law enforcement system is present, and we're a developed country. And I think growing up, when I was first introduced this, maybe in college in my undergrad, where I'm thinking, well, this only is going to happen in countries that just feel like the structure is so much different than our country,
right.
And it just makes it even more upsetting, for a lack of a better word, that something like this is so prevalent here.
Yeah, 40 found in Georgia, 40 found in Ohio. Makes you wonder, where else are the ones that aren't being found right now, and how many are out there? I mean, it's scary. It's scary. So, all right, let's move on to a more uplifting.
Yes, it needs to be more uplifting. But I do want to say that there are other charities out there that work. Is it the Samaritan Women has a big piece on trafficking, mostly of women and girls, but it's just appalling. And everybody should go and look at some of the statistics and find out how to protect themselves from something like this happening to them, possibly, or to their children. There are like certain places where the predators that take these people, like to hang out. Yes.
That. I mean, I was just seeing a discussion on Facebook, and the question was, somebody posted, put in the comment section something that you did as a child that is now considered dangerous. And some people were saying, like, walking a mile to my friend's house when I was 10 years old, or maybe even a little bit younger, where, I mean, I remember being out and about, very independent, of my parents, much younger than I'm thinking about my children being out and about independent from us, riding my bike and, going places, going to stores by myself that I could ride my bike to, where I'm thinking now I wouldn't, that wouldn't be something at all that I would feel comfortable with. So I think it's figuring out where we are now, using resources that are available, so that everybody can, you can understand and how you're going to feel comfortable yourself to be able to move forward.
Well, and it's another thing that Pastor Jay mentioned this past weekend is that it's a different world. There's more things talking about knowledge. It used to be when we were growing up, it's like, don't talk to strangers, and that's obviously still good advice. But there's so much more I think we need to prepare people for. I mean, I don't know how, I don't think I've shared this story on this show before, but when I was a kid, talking about walking, I walked to school in a number of places I lived. My dad was in the Air Force. We moved around an awful lot. But while I was living in Nebraska, actually, I walked to school. And of course, when I was a little kid, I thought I was walking forever. I went on Google Maps recently to see where my school was versus where my house was. It really wasn't that far.
Yes.
But it felt like an eternity.
Everything is bigger when
you're that small, yeah. But there was a time I was walking home from school, and sure enough, somebody pulled up in a station wagon. Remember station wagons?
Mm-hmm.
And tried to convince me that my parents had asked them to come pick me up and to get into the car. And I refused, and they did end up driving off. I mean, this was a situation where there were other kids walking and a lot of witnesses, and so they weren't gonna, I guess, jump out and get me in the car. But that's always been an experience that's stuck with me, because as much as I think, back then, what I was taught was don't talk to strangers. Of course, you have certain people that are allowed to pick you up, and you teach your kids that. Lots of parents have, words or whatever, they have to know this code word or whatever it may be. But I just feel nowadays in this era of trafficking and child trafficking, there's just so many more things we need to be aware of them, because make our children aware of and make people aware of, because it's not just children. We see, teens and adults being trafficked as well. And to be aware of your surroundings, and to not fall for this gimmick or that gimmick, and I don't know, it's a dangerous world, but we know that God is in control.
Yeah.
So,
amen.
All right, now we'll move on to the next story, the more uplifting story. I was going to go to the uplifting story. I was just saying, let you know, Mary Kay, but you're the one that kept us on that one for a little while longer, so it's your fault. So yes. So this is kind of a neat story, and the reason I say it's neat is because, and I don't know if you even realized it. I don't think you did. But this is actually a follow-up story to one that we covered back in June.
Yay.
With Greg Durwart was co-hosting the show, so it was the last time that Ben decided to leave me. But we actually covered, shall we say, the dawn of this movement back in June, and now we're seeing that it's continuing to grow. And what I'm talking about is what they're calling Riots to Revival. It's a movement that was started by a pastor named Charles, and I probably mispronounced it last time, and I'm going to apologize again because I'm probably going to mispronounce it again, but I think it's Caruku, Karuku, and Lindsay Caruku, who I believe is his wife. They are pastors of the International Outreach Church in Burnsville, Minnesota. So with the killing of George Floyd, they decided to try to go to the location where he was shot and start basically preaching the gospel and trying to foster reconciliation, because what they saw, of course, at the time there in Minnesota was a lot of animosity, a lot of anger between various different groups, and they said, we want to go and we want to have the reconciling love of Christ and demonstrate that. Well, what's happened is these riots to revival events, if you want to call them that or whatever, have been spreading. And now, of course, over the past week, we've seen a lot of upheaval in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And so now I don't know if these pastors have traveled there or they've just somehow inspired it or what, but they've been seeing these riots to revival event taking place now in Kenosha, and it's spreading around the country. And this is a Facebook post that Pastor Caruku posted He said, miracles in Kenosha, a massive move of God, salvation, healing, racial reconciliation, and awesome baptisms on the streets. Riot to revival, glory to God, let the healing begin, is what he posted. There was an online video posted by a business owner in Kenosha, Wisconsin, who talked about her personal experience and says, as baptisms were taking place, there was a little bit of a lull. Then another woman came forward, and then she talked about watching this other woman come forward, and how it impacted her. And so what you're starting to see is, people are watching. They're watching these revival events taking place. And Pastor Caruco is actually asking for people to join them because they see this as, as unrest spreads throughout the country, they see these events possibly being able to go into these locations, but they need help doing that, obviously. They need local folks to be able to go in and start spreading it. And so it makes me think, when I talked about the story, what month is it now? It's September. So it was the end of June. So that's like 2.5 months ago. I guess what struck me generally about it was just that all too often, I think even we as Christians fall into the cultural trap of, and please don't misunderstand me. I don't want to diminish the role of Christians in issues of justice. All right, we need to be outspoken about issues of justice. We need to make sure that what's right is right, and we stand up for what's right and what's true. But at the same time, we also have a job in a world that is talking past each other and not listening to each other and dividing themselves up into teams to kind of be that voice that can come in and be reconciling of people. And so what I like in these stories is I like that aspect of it, that we're seeing Christians go in to try to be that reconciling. But he didn't just go in and say, hey, we just went and started preaching gospel. He's talking about racial reconciliation being something that's happening at these events. And I find that as an important and sobering reminder for Christians when things like this happen. So your thought. I know I originally said I was going to read the story and then field to you for your thoughts, but I went first this time. Sorry.
It was beautifully said. I'm sitting here going, oh, just keep going, Ken. It's beautiful. I mean, I agree with everything that you're saying. I think, a few things pop into my mind of just, the beauty of the picture of this, where, coming to kind of the location of so much brokenness and so much division and so much pain, and bringing in this beautiful picture of something that happened in this exact same location, where there's reconciliation and there's rebirth and there's coming together in the exact location where things were torn apart. And the picture, the illustration of it is so powerful. A couple things come to mind of just, I was just reading I'm reading a wonderful book by Elizabeth Elliot right now before I go to bed, but and she talks about suffering, and she talks about how she's convinced that through her experience that there's no way to understand the reconciliation that you can find in the knowledge of the gospel and Jesus's death on the cross for us without suffering. It has to be there, and in order for the story to be complete. And that's really hard to wrap my head around in this, of what, why the suffering, why does it have to be there? But as you kind of dig into the gospel, you understand how suffering has to be this really, really important piece. And it feels like this is a great picture of that, where this place of incredible suffering that was present is something that, if it wasn't there, if the suffering hadn't been there and this awful thing hadn't happened, this place wouldn't be significant for this beautiful new event and situation to happen in this exact same location. And the other thing that I think about is, in my immediate thoughts in response to this amazing story is, often God, he gives us direction, but only to a point. And he says, you need to show me that you can go, and you need to show and demonstrate your faith in me before I reveal everything to you. This is an example of going into a place, putting action toward something, and seeing how then God can bless it on the other side. God is waiting for us to move. If he spelled everything out to us before we went to work for him, then there wouldn't be faith involved. It would be, okay, well, now I understand how it's all going to go, and I feel totally comfortable with it, so now I'm going to go ahead and go do it, and it's going to be great. This seems like a situation where, I see a whole lot of showing this example of trust and faith, of entering into a location that, is risky and dangerous, and some beautiful things that can happen once that step of faith was put into action of, okay, we'll go, and then God met them there.
Yeah, and it shows that lots of times people might ask me, well, why did this bad thing happen, or why did that bad thing happen? And Ben and I talked about this, I think it was last week on the show. It's like sometimes the answer is we don't know. And that's an answer that we should expect to be the answer sometimes, but it's like we don't know. I can't tell you why that particular bad thing happened. But one piece of assurance that I can give you is that God can use that. We've seen example after example after example where God takes something tragic that's happened and he can turn it around in some way, shape, or form and use it for his glory. And here, there may be people that weren't going to be accepting him, that weren't going to be accepting Christ, but now have through these events. And that's just an example of, is God the author of evil? No, he's not. Does God bring about evil things? He doesn't cause evil things to happen. We live in a fallen world, but he can use it. He can take that evil and he can turn it into something glorious and good. And so to the extent that that gives anybody, can give people some reassurance through our suffering that God can bring good out of it. And we might not even always see that good thing, There might be, I'll tell you, it's funny, I wrote years ago, I used to write a blog. I had my own, and then I participated in what's called the Christian Apologetics Alliance. It was a nationwide or worldwide group of apologists that had this blog set up. It's still there. My stuff is still there, but I haven't written in probably 8 years or so now. But I was at a point in my life where I was getting, I wasn't getting a lot of, shall we say, return on investment. I wasn't seeing a lot of interaction and people with the blog posts I was putting up there. And I was like, you know what, I think it's time. I think it's time for me to stop doing this. And then right after I said that, I got an email from someone saying, oh, by the way, I just read this to you, and it was so powerful, it was so amazing. So I do think that God sometimes gives us windows into so we just kind of encourage us, like, look at the impact you're having. You may not see it. This person who emailed me was like from somewhere on the other side of the globe. You may not see it, but look at the impact look at what God is doing through what you're doing by you being obedient. Kind of like you said, take that move and then watch as he blesses it. We may not always see all the blessings, but God does, because he's got that eternal perspective. And that just makes me think that something I've come to realize since, I should say, I realize is a bad word for it, because, it's one of these things that you know up here, but you really start to feel it in here at a certain time. Since this whole COVID thing started, is what you were saying about, sometimes, God, he can make it abundantly clear sometimes exactly what he wants you to do. Even leaving aside the fact that he wrote us a book, so there's that. But even some specific situations, it can be so obvious what he wants you to do. But you're looking at it and you're like, and you're scared. Because like, God, I don't see how I can do that. Or if I do that, then I'm worried that X, Y, and Z is going to happen. Oh, you want me to go, use our resources for that, but then I'm not going to have those resources for this other thing, or whatever it may be. And I'm not going to bore everybody with all the different examples, but I will tell you that I have seen example after example after example since COVID began, where whether myself or someone else or whatever has taken that step, has been obedient to what he wants them to do, and then things happen that you never could have envisioned before you took that step. And it's clear, it's like God just saying, trust me, you do what I want you to do, and I'll take care of all these things that you're worried about. And he's been so reliable throughout this pandemic in that regard. And one of the beautiful things, I was mentioning this in one of our meetings here at Trinity a little while ago, that I've really been very happy with here at Trinity is, lots of times when you're faced with a pandemic and you're worried about, oh my gosh, are we going to have the resource to do this, that, or the other? The natural reaction, and I know a lot of churches have done this, and maybe we'll get to this in our last story today, has been to almost a withdrawal, a step back. Okay, we need to protect what we have. We need to bury it in the sand, to use a parable example. Whereas I think we at Trinity here have seen a number of examples where our response has not been to withdraw and protect, but to grow and to expand the ministry and say, okay, now we're in this new reality. How do we serve in this new reality and push ministry forward? It's not easy, it's scary, but I think events like we're seeing here, whether it be when it started in Minnesota and Wisconsin, are prime examples of, yeah, that looks scary, yeah, that looks tough, but you be obedient to God, and then let the Holy Spirit do the work, and He will.
Oh gosh, I mean, keep on going, Ken. It's just everything you're saying. I'm nodding emphatically because I just couldn't agree more. I feel like this season in COVID has been such an amazing experience to recognize those that need to feel the fear and push through it, because I agree with you. I think, in my experiences, when I think through and back in my life, so often, the thing that holds me back from moving is fear.
Yeah.
It's fear. And mostly it's fear in, my ability, and, self-doubt. That's where it comes from for me. But there's a whole lot to fear in, prior to moving of, am I going to be safe? Are you going to take care of me? Essentially asking the question like, God, are you faithful? And are you going to do what you said you were going to do, and be what you say you're going to be? And I think what I'm seeing now, if we were joking before the show of how old I am, and I am past, I am now, like, if any of you watched the last week's episode of Trinity Talk, I realize I am no longer in the young adult age group. I have aged out of it, and although I feel like I can argue that I feel like more of a young adult than I am, and whatever that is.
So do I, but I'm not convincing anybody. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I was just like, really, I am? But now it really is a time in my life where I'm in my mid-30s, and I feel like there's evidence now to God showing His faithfulness, and as a younger person, how hard that is to develop that faith and to hold on to it, because you only have a few years of evidence behind you. Mm-hmm. It's hard to see, from your past experiences how God has been faithful. Of course He has in that. But the older that I get and the more that I see and I look back and I see His faithfulness, the more I can kind of hold that really close to my heart of reminding myself of these very tangible ways of, Jessica, God was faithful in this and this and this and this. Don't you see? You see it, and you see the evidence of it. And, I get disappointed that I needed that evidence to be able to have the faith to move forward. But in the times where I have said to him, I've, like, exactly what you said, it was very crystal clear what needed to happen. But I was saying to God, no, I'm too scared. But then in the moments where, by the grace of God, I was able to step forward and take action, how He has blessed that so abundantly. And the work that we've done at Trinity here, I mean, I think back to mid-March, and we're in, the building, and we're, trying to conduct worship, and all of us are, well, I'll just speak for myself. I'm terrified. I don't know what's going on. The schools are closed. We can't leave our homes, and we don't know, where this illness is coming from and what's happening and why people are getting sick and how it's happening. And, of just this incredible confidence that I felt this whole entire time of God saying, Jessica, you must go. You have to push through what you're fearful of and go and trust me, and that I will not leave you. It says in the Psalms, like, I will hold you by your right hand. And it says, I will hold you by my right hand. There's both those references to who the writer's talking about. There's this connection that's never going to be gone, and that knowing the Lord and understanding His presence, whether we feel it or not, is beautiful to know. So, you know, I lost my train of thought because I saw our wonderful producer pull up a sign.
Just
but,
ignore her. That's for my benefit.
Okay. Just the richness of that, you know, of going.
Do you remember, because I did this while you were talking, it made me think of this, and we do have a comment on YouTube. I'll get to it in just a second. As we're coming up, we're preparing for kickoff for this year, and our theme for kickoff this year is Cornerstone Faith. But it made me think of while you were talking. Do you remember what the theme for last year's kickoff was?
Oh my gosh, that's exercising short-term memory, which is not very good in my mind right now.
See, that's how you know you're still young, because you look back at, you know, a year, or maybe it's a sign of we're getting old. You look back at a year and say short-term memory. You know, when you're younger, you know, a year ago was long-term memory. But,
well, whatever memory it is, it's not coming to me, and I'm not hopeful.
The theme was move.
Okay.
It was move, and I know that because I had to make a promo video for it.
Okay,
but,
well, so it's solidified in your mind.
But doesn't that I just find that funny. Again, you see how the Holy Spirit works.
The year we were
and
have
it
to
was
move.
There you were. Holy Spirit was inspiring Pastor Jay to come up with this message about moving, because God knew what was coming.
Yeah.
You know, and it was preparing us here at Trinity for the necessity of not being afraid to move. But speaking of being afraid to move, I do say something else that stuck with me. Is a long time ago, we did an episode under the old format of Trinity Talk Live where we were talking about people and what got them into ministry. And your husband was on that show. And I asked him, went around asking people about, you know, how it is that they got into ministry. You remember the story, Mary Kay? And there was an analogy that kept going about, you know, God opening the door and how they got through the door. And his answer was something along the lines of, well, God opened the door. And I said, no.
Yeah.
And eventually I think God shoved him through it, or something. Was the way the analogy was that he gave. So anyway, so Zach Kreiner does comment here on YouTube. It says, we live in an age where young people are taught to question God whenever anything bad happens, and the events of the last few months have taken that to an extreme. And that gets back to, I think, what I was talking about at the very beginning, you know, Zach, where the number one reason given by people who leave the faith, those that give the reason, is, you know, the evil and suffering in the world. And they tend to think that bad things happening in the world somehow means that there can't be a good and loving God out there. And that's just not true. I mean, I'm not going to get into all the philosophical stuff. We've covered that on the show before, but it's just not true. As a matter of fact, in even saying that there is such a thing as evil, if you follow that down, that rabbit trail down where it logically concludes, you end up having to believe in God in order for that to even make sense, a statement to even make sense.
C.S. Lewis's process of elimination.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
But I guess my point here, but when we're talking about this type, like our first story tonight, when we're talking about the traffic and things like that, we do need to be careful that when you're dealing with somebody who's personally experienced that level of evil, generally speaking, the approach to take with that person is not, now let's have a philosophical discussion. You know, that's not what they need to hear. It's going to be more the loving approach and the demonstrating Christ's love to them in that situation. So, all right. My wife was holding about, you going to hold up a sign? I don't want you to distract Jess again. So if you're going to hold,
Well, I'm not talking now, so.
All right, 2 more minutes before she has to hold up the 45-minute sign. So let's move on to the next story, shall we? And Zach Kreiner says he loves C.S. Lewis. So do I, Zach. I've got like virtually his entire collection if you ever want to borrow it. I'm sure we can work out a rental arrangement. No, I actually took a C.S. Lewis course several years ago just for fun. It was pretty cool. So anyway, so our next story here comes from the land of Tik Tok. No, for those of you that are old like me, that is not just the sound that a clock makes. The clock that we had an old, was a grandmother clock, not a full-fledged grandfather clock, in my parents' in the foyer growing up. Do they still have it, Mary Kay? No, they haven't actually. Remember that little small one that used to hang on the wall? I don't think they have that anymore. But anyway, no, that's completely sidetracking the conversation here.
They have a cuckoo clock.
What's that?
They have the cuckoo clock.
They have a cuckoo clock now. Well, that seems more fitting for my dad. No, I'm sorry. My dad doesn't watch the show. It's okay. I love you, Dad, if you happen to watch this be the first episode you've ever watched, but okay. I still love you.
It'll be this one, though.
It'll be this one, yeah. When I called him cuckoo. You know what? If anybody knows my dad, you know what he would say if you heard me say that? You're not wrong. So
He's owning it.
He'll own it.
I'd say that about myself, too.
I get my sense of humor from my father.
Hmm.
And my yawn. Ask my wife. I yawn like my dad.
Oh, that's
Um,
fun to pass along.
so, anyway, back to TikTok.
Heredity of yawn.
You're talking about clocks. No. So TikTok is it's a social media platform that primarily utilizes, film, videos, and it's designed for, phones. And you can post little videos of, I think it started out as primarily music and almost like a karaoke type of thing, but it's expanded now. It doesn't just have to be music videos now. A lot of people have little videos where they talk, and I think there's I'm not a TikTok user myself, but my understanding of it is if you use your phone and you record directly with your phone, I think there's some kind of time limit on how long the videos can be, but I think it's longer if you actually upload a video to it. Anyway, but that's it. It's pictures, Facebook, but all videos, to communicate. Not like YouTube, not like this, but it's more like things that you would post on social media, like on Facebook and things, but in video form. So anyway, so there was a lady, her username was Inky Does Hair, and she her first name apparently is Felicia. At least that's what she holds herself out as on TikTok. And she has posted a number of videos, basically announcing her atheism and asking. I'm trying to find the part in the video here where it actually describes some of her past videos where she would be cursing. She would be asking the universe to manifest things in her life. Well, what happened over time is she started watching other TikTok videos that have been put out there by Christians. And over time, she started to realize something started to move in her heart. And she then eventually posted a new video, which essentially said that she's had a turnaround. And she was asking for needing help learning how to be a Christian, because she said at this point she's no longer an atheist. She now wants to follow God. And this is a quote from her video. She said, "If you've been on my page before, you know I've posted things about being an atheist. And I took it down because now I'm really confused. Because all I see are videos about God and Jesus, and I actually prayed the other night, and I don't know why. I guess I need help because I just don't know where to start. I just don't get how, if you guys claim he loves me so much, I don't understand why I have denied him so many times." And I got to admit, when I read that last quote, at first I thought she was going to go the direction of what we've been talking about. If there's a God that loves me so much, how would we see so much evil in the world? But I find it fascinating, but that's not the direction she went.
I reread the line because I thought certainly that it would be the former that you're talking about, but her language, that's not what she said.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, and what she said was, you just want to say, yes, that's the point. You're getting it. You're getting it.
Yep.
Anyway, your reaction, because we hear lots of people all the time that will lambaste social media. All right. Obviously, again, I always like to say, in the interest of full disclosure, I oversee our social media here for the church, but the church is not on TikTok. But I got to say, stories like this make me wonder if we should be doing something more on that platform. But what do you think when you see somebody that's on social media and is actually starting to question their atheism and move away from their atheism as a result of what they're seeing there?
Yeah. I think my first thought would be God is everywhere and God can move in any way that he wants to move. I think that there's not an easy answer. I think we could all agree that social media has been the birthplace of a lot of wonderful things, but also the birthplace of a lot of hard things. And just, I think with any opportunity to communicate, we as human beings can create, with any opportunity, it can go one way or the other. And I don't think that there's, any clear-cut, black and white, concrete answer that we could walk away and package and say, okay, now I know how to handle social media after this conversation. I don't think there's an easy answer. What I do know is that social media, what are the things that we can be sure of? That God can move anywhere and everywhere, that social media is a part of our lifestyle and our lives. Period. It's there, and so because it's there, we can't ignore that it's, that's not that can't be an opportunity for God to work and move. I have an aunt of mine that is a beautiful picture and an example of a woman that has followed Jesus her whole life and has encouraged me, and just poured herself into me as I'm growing up. And she's, if you think about the people that, have loved you into being, like Mr. Rogers says, like she is one of those people. And something that she said to me that really stuck with me, that I feel like can translate to a lot of different situations when we're talking about relationship building or communicating or engaging in conversation with one another about the Lord, is she said, Jessica, remember, don't ever forget that you are an imperfect person. And when you talk to anyone or engage with anyone in any way, you might make a mistake in the way that you communicate. You might say the wrong thing, and that's possible. You can take the pressure off of yourself that you don't have to say things perfectly. That can't be, the pressure that you put on your shoulders. What you can do is do your best and communicate the best way that you can. And then after that conversation or interaction, fall to your knees and pray that the Lord would work, and that the person that you were talking with, if there's anything that they need to forget that you said, that you would pray that they would forget it and that it would come out of their mind. But the thing that you did say that God wants to use would stay and would penetrate their heart, and God could use that, that God is powerful enough for that to be a reality. And so I just think about that kind of translating into the social media situation where, something like I don't know, I don't use TikTok either, but like it's a certain period of time, a number of seconds, if you're trying to capture something in a number of seconds, or in TikTok, or, on Facebook, where it's just this, a line and an image possibly, or like on Instagram where it's an image where, there could be a lot of mistakes or misconceptions or things that could translate in a way that could be not what you meant, or that other person could take it in some way. Like that is the problem with social media, is that it's not a discussion, a conversation, but that there's possibilities there of something to translate and for God to move in that place. So I mean, that's kind of what I try to hold on to, is in thinking about social media, is prayerfully considering what you put out, but understanding that God can move, and that having an example like this, where just by observing what she was watching and observing on TikTok, God used that and brought her into a completely different place.
Yeah. Jeanette Harrington has a comment here on Facebook, says, God is everywhere and can reach us in the darkest places and is always in control. Mm-hmm. And actually, and Jeanette, that kind of she's hitting on some of the same things that I was thinking of while you were talking, Jess. First of all, I mean, she talks about how God always being in control. And you talk about, you mentioned, sometimes you leave these conversations and you're so worried about, whether you're going to say the right thing, and you hit your knees and you ask for God to use that conversation in some way, shape, or form. And I think a lot of that is we as Christians sometimes put way too much pressure on ourselves. You got to understand here, nobody's coming to Christ without the Holy Spirit in the first place, okay? Mm-hmm. It's God's work. Our job is to be obedient to Him. And so, stop thinking and feeling like it's all on you. Right. Your job is to be obedient. I mean, because let's face it, if you do what God wants you to do, it's for your spiritual growth too, and so we put way too much pressure on ourselves, and I think we kind of forget that really the one doing the work is God. All right.
Which is His job.
Yeah.
Like he's worthy of it. That's why He is God and we're not. Which I think I struggle with. I just want to do a good job. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that gets convoluted. That my job is not. My role is not really my role. That I'm putting myself in the place where I wasn't meant to be.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll tell you something that kind of disturbs me. And again, this kind of gets back to, in a very tangential way, the conversation we were having earlier. We were talking about, caretakers, and sometimes when you've got someone that you love, that you're trying to help, that's been through trauma, that it can be draining on the caretaker as well. And in the sense that obedience to God, sometimes it doesn't mean it's always going to be all hunky-dory. Sometimes it's hard, and it can be hard. And in the emotion, or in the social media context, I think we see, and I've seen a number of Christian groups, organizations posting about other platforms and saying, hey, Christians, why don't we all move off of Facebook and move over to this platform where there's not so much anti-Christian negativity, we can be more open and not always be under attack. And don't get me wrong, I have no problem with a both and mentality. If you want to open up something on this other platform that may be more catering to Christians, so you can have an in-house conversation, so to speak. And there are certainly people who are just emotionally, they're not in a position where they need to do that. And I'm speaking more of the church corporate, the church as a whole, not necessarily, and knowing the situation might be different for individual people within the church. But what I don't ever want to see is the church as a whole abandon these social media platforms, whether it be TikTok, whether it be Facebook, because I've often described it. And one thing we were talking before we went on the air, that I found out through Facebook, and its memories, that yesterday was my 5-year anniversary of starting to work here at Trinity. And when I first started working, that's if Facebook's telling the truth, which I'm assuming it must be, because it got that information apparently from me at some point when I put it in there. But when I first started working here, I was only working 4 hours a week, and my job was social media. That's all I did, was social media. And excuse me as I take a drink in front of everybody. But one thing I talked about even back then, and the way I always envisioned it, and I envisioned my job, was that the digital world it's a mission field. I mean, we all think of mission fields as, we're going to go to this geographic area or that geographic area. We're always thinking in physical terms. And I was like, well, that worked, 50 years ago, 20 years ago even. But with the advent of the internet, we have to think differently, that where people go is not always a physical location. It's online. It's in this digital era. And so these social media platforms are mission fields. And if we're willing to take the risk and send missionaries to physical mission fields, then we as the church should be doing the same in these digital mission fields. And we see things like this story. What would happen if all the Christians on TikTok said, oh, there's too much negativity here, we're getting out? Well, then this woman wouldn't have seen all the videos, And so I just, that worries me sometimes when I see Christians talking about kind of jumping ship and getting off of these platforms. I don't think we should ever get off these platforms. We need to find, just like you find the right people who are called to some physical mission field, we need to find the people that are called to this digital mission field and make sure that Christ always has ambassadors in that area.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Sorry. Since I didn't get to read the article, she said she needed help. Did somebody give it to her?
I don't know. I would assume so. I mean, they're
be careful about assuming.
Okay. But you're right. This article was, I would hope so, because this article was written by by ChristianHeadlines.com. So it's been spread by Christians. If everybody's talking about how great it is and no Christians are stepping in, then you're right, that'd be a problem.
Sometimes everybody thinks somebody else is going to do it.
Yeah, you're right.
Well, I had the same thought, Mary Kay, because I didn't remember reading, what the follow-up was.
Where do we go next? Just like we were talking about earlier.
Right. And so I think this is another example of there's no, easy, clear-cut answer, but that, I think as I think through it, this, like you were saying, this digital world is so present, and COVID-19 has, raised that, awareness and situation and put it right here in front of us of how important it is. And I was reading today, a lot of people saying, the world will never be the same. We're not going to just go back, to where we were. It's unlikely that the world would just return once, we get through the crisis, that it will engage in the same way. But that, how do we recognize that the digital world is a mission field and an important one to be engaged in, but then what happens after this connection, that is digital, that has a different form than a human to human, a relationship building, or a relationship that's going to build and grow over time, kind of like what you were talking about at the beginning of the show with these kids,
Right.
where the value and the fruit that comes from building a relationship with someone and building that trust and that understanding, that comfort level where you just can't get there with someone that you only know maybe from a social media platform, because it needs time.
Right.
And so how do we as Christians kind of wrap our head around that, of how do we meet people in their need where they are, where, I mean, the bravery that she shows is incredible, but now then how does that relationship continue?
Well, I have no idea what that sign was. You need a magic marker. Was that supposed to be 60? Was that what that was supposed to be?
Yes, it's 60.
Okay.
60.
Sorry, she holds up signs to let us know how long we've been going too.
You didn't bring me down the one I could write on.
So, but no, that's interesting, because discipleship is what that brings to mind. Is that Jesus didn't say just that he wants us to go out and make converts. He said he wants us to go out and make disciples. Mm-hmm. And discipleship isn't a one-time event. And too much in the Christian church, I think we focus on that's the salvation aspect of it, that we don't think about what happens next. We are called to be disciples and to disciple other people. I gave the analogy once in a message I preached a while ago of mountain climbers going up the mountain, and if you picture these mountain climbers that are all tethered to each other, you see that, where you got the one in front is roped to the one behind him, and then he's roped to one behind him, and that's kind of how I see discipleship, is that God's at the front and he's kind of leading the way. But then, it's somebody who's, shall we say, more experienced in the faith, is leading someone who's less experienced, and so on and so forth. And so we should be continually guiding people in the faith, even after once they become Christians. The challenge is, how do we do that in this new normal? We as a church need to rethink this, because we're used to the situation where people come into our church and then we can invite them to the Bible study or this small group or that small group, and now it's kind of like, okay, we invite them to this Zoom meeting or that whatever. But we really need to rethink of how do we now disciple people so they don't just have experiences like this lady on TikTok. It's like, oh gee, yeah, I've got some questions now. Okay. Now, how do we best minister to you? How do we disciple you in this new environment?
Because I think the heartbreaking thing, not to cut you off, but I think what breaks my heart is to think of the possible situation. I don't know if, we pray that this didn't happen, or, just because there wasn't, coverage on it in the story, but that she put that video out and no one said anything.
Yeah.
And no one answered her. So how do we avoid that not happening?
Remind me, Ken. I don't remember which show it was on, but I'm pretty sure it was Ben who brought it up. But there's a website that's kind of like Google for Christians, where they can write in a question that they have. What was it? Do you remember that?
I do. I don't remember what it was called. That was one of our stories,
yeah.
Actually.
Well,
and this was.
It up. I didn't think it was. He brought it up during one of the stories.
I thought that was actually one of our primary stories. I could be wrong.
Okay,
but this was months ago. Yeah.
It's been since COVID, because I remember it happening in this, format that we were doing. I just can't remember what it was called. So maybe we should find out what that is and.
Yeah, go back through our old episodes. But we did an episode about that where we did talk about this place where it's basically you could ask questions online and get your questions answered. So anyway, so I've been told it's after 60 minutes, and Mr. Gast was just wandering through the narthex, I'm betting, trying to see if I was done with the show yet. And I'm betting I'm going to miss him, because he's probably going to head out. It is 6:30 after all. But let's try to do our last story, shall we? Because, sure. Jess, you gave a great lead into it. You actually kind of started talking about it when you're talking about whether things were going to return to normal.
That was totally on purpose.
Exactly. See, you're a pro now. You're getting a segue from one story into the next. Our next story is from the Barna Group, and it's a little different. We've talked a lot about research and studies and things like this. This was actually more of a comment that was made by Barna President David Kinnaman, which then incorporated a lot of the research and studies they've been doing over the last several months. And the comment that he actually made was that based on trends they've seen both before and after the COVID-19 outbreak, that he believes American churches are going to look very different after this pandemic, and predicts that maybe a fifth of them could actually close their doors. And he cites some very interesting things that he's seen unfolding. First of all, he says, look, even though some churches have reopened, as we have here, we've reopened for physical in-person worship with social distancing and masks and everything like that. But even those churches that have reopened have not seen their numbers bounce back. Their in-person attendance numbers are not what they were before COVID, and that's pretty much true across the board. Then he also points to several things that trends they saw starting to emerge even before COVID hit. Things like church hopping was increasing. So people weren't identifying with a particular home church. They were jumping from one to another. Church membership was declining among young people. And 10% of all Americans, whether Christian or not, said that they saw the church as being irrelevant. And these are all trends that were starting to grow before COVID even hit. And then COVID hit. And when COVID hit, they had a survey that found that, and we talked about this one on the show in an earlier episode, 1 in 3 practicing Christians admitted to stopping attending church, not just physical church, mind you, but even online. Even online church, they stopped attending once COVID hit. Obviously, one impact this has all had is on church finances. A lot of churches have seen a financial hit, even those, like we did here, that received some kind of relief through the CARES Act. Obviously, giving is down. If you don't have as many people coming to the pews, you don't have as many people giving. It's a reality of church life that even if you have a lot of people watching online, it's harder to get people to take those extra steps to give online. It's somehow easier just to have an offering plate that's either gets passed down the aisle to you or that you walk up and physically put your money in, than asking you to go to this other website and input this information and put in your credit card information and all of that. And so you're seeing even online giving isn't necessarily replacing or bringing things back to the level they were at beforehand. And so he's saying, the president of Barna is saying that with all these trends and what we've seen, he thinks that within the next 18 months or so, we could be seeing up to 1 in 5 churches close down. What do you think?
So I think the jury's still out. Like, I think that this whole process in this time that we've been going through, one thing I've learned is that you never know what the future's going to hold. I can't ignore the truth that although things have begun to open, we still don't have a solution to protecting ourselves against this illness. So, I think that's something to consider. We can exercise precautions and be as safe as we can, but at the end of the day, there is no vaccine quite yet. So I do wonder if that is bringing people, people are having that in mind of, I just want to be on, just stay home because that's where I feel comfortable. And that's a personal decision. And, if that is where they feel comfortable, then that's their choice to make, because this time is so incredibly difficult. I do think, though, if I could be so bold as to ask the questions of if attendance and involvement in church is lower now, what has been taken away that could have been motivators for attendance prior to COVID? Some of these indicators that they're suggesting beforehand, is the purpose and the motivation to attend church. Was it to be in the presence of God and to gather among believers? Was that the sole purpose of attendance? Or, to be bold, was it a social engagement for people? Was it a safe place that I could attend, to bring my family, that that we could have activities to do that would be safe and controlled? Or was it, was it an opportunity to, to engage in other activities, that were socially minded? What are the reasons and the purposes? And I wonder if in the age that we live, that, life has become very consumer driven, kind of across the board. So I wonder, and I'm asking the question, is it because, if that focus is kind of has been present, that now the inability to, for a while, the inability to gather at all, or, now the inability to gather, in a way that is different than before, is that affecting this kind of mindset of, well, now I'm not receiving in the way that I was before, and the product isn't as it was before, and therefore, I'm not as satisfied, and that feels, that's lowering my motivation to attend. I am not in a position to say that I have I don't, I'm not, I don't struggle with these same things. I'm not, in a different place. So I'm included in all of these, these reasons to be a part of a church body that might not be solely to worship the Lord and to give to him because of his love for me. And, considering them, we walk around and we have idols in our lives of things that, that we want to take the place of God in our lives, and things that we try to substitute that, aren't going to be the things that fill us up eternally, but they do feel good in the moment. As a parent, it feels great to be able to have a place where my children could come and to make friends, and to be in a place where they can have wonderful social engagements. And am I going to lie to say that wasn't something that motivated me to be here? Of course it did, and so it really is, it's convicting for myself, and it's very interesting to think and to kind of ponder, what are our reasons in this country to gather together in places of worship? And because of the time that we're in, where a lot of these things have not like trickled away, but have been ripped away from us, because they're not present, is that affecting things? But at the end of the day, after you come around the big circle of the school of thought, the train of thought is that, and going back to Zach's comment about young people are told to question, and to that I say, question, ask the questions, and express your doubt, and express the things that don't make sense to you, and in this time of COVID, where things have looked so different and things are projected to be so different afterwards, that doesn't change God's faithfulness, and it doesn't change how real he is, and it doesn't change how good he is. And so, to any young person that I've ever talked to that say, well, I've got questions, and I'm going to be difficult right now, like, you're not being difficult. Ask the questions, because the answers are there. And if it's not the time in your life where you feel like you're ready to dive into those answers, that's okay. That's okay. We'll continue to pray, and I will be here when you want to talk again, because I truly believe that God is going to redeem this world, because he has. I've seen it in my life, and I've seen it in the lives of countless people that I know. And so I trust and believe that to be true. Maybe after we're done, this time, and the vaccine comes out, and we all reemerge out of the shadowy places and figure out how to engage with one another again, and to be in social situations and learn life again, and what it looks like after this incredible thing that's happened to us that we will be talking about for centuries to come. God is good in it, and he has never changed, and he never will.
And now it's my turn to say amen. You just keep going, Jess. That was I would say yes. And it's funny, because Ben and I were talking about, and I do know we have another comment on Facebook, which we'll get to in a second here. Ben and I were talking a few episodes ago about atheist churches growing up, and that popping up around the country, and this
that seems
movement.
Like an oxymoron.
Well, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But it gets back to what you were saying. It's like, okay, but so why were these people were remembering going to church and getting something out of it, but now of course they don't believe in God anymore, so they were trying to duplicate whatever it was they were getting out of it. And the focus was on what I called at the time the surface elements, or the accidents of worship, the singing of the songs, and so what they did is they would substitute in these atheist churches, they would try to substitute things for those elements while keeping God out of it. And I think that's a problem we see even amongst the Christian church today. And this gets kind of to what you were saying, as far as, why are people, why were you coming to church in the first place? And what is it that's changed and was ripped away? If the reason you were coming to church in the first place was, and I liked that, I don't know if you heard, you used the word product to describe what was going on in church, like a consumer and a product. If you were coming to church solely as a consumer, and you saw this as a product that is there to benefit you and to generate these feelings, and so you're focusing on those accidents, those surface elements, and not focusing on worship and the importance of church being not what the church can do for you, but for you of praising God and worshiping and lifting him up. Then when that gets taken away, when those surface elements get taken away, maybe you're not going to come to church, because maybe you weren't realizing what church was all about in the first place, and you didn't really feel it. And that kind of gets to, Sean Duffy commented here on Facebook. He says, I grew up at Trinity, but wanted to stay with the ELCA and left before that church closed. But the ELC, I'm assuming, Sean, you're talking about because I know there was an ELC, I can't talk today, an ELCA church that Sean attended that closed down. And so I stayed with that. I left before that church closed, but was fortunate enough to gain insight into some of the problems. A lot of what I encountered was poor vetting of staff. And Sean, I don't know if this is what you experienced there, but I will tell you it's funny because, speaking of Zach Kreiner, he and I were having a conversation earlier today, and it was about politicians, but it holds true. I made the point it holds true for all of humanity. We were talking about power, and, people who get power tend not to be willing to want to lay it down. And what we see, I think, here is that, we're all fallen humans. We're all imperfect. And if you have people within the church that don't have the right attitude about worship, like we were just talking about, who are focusing too much on those surface elements, then you're going to see a church in decline, in my opinion. Because if your leadership doesn't put God first and keep the focus there, and is more worried about the worship service as a product that people can consume, then that's getting back to what we were saying before. That's thinking like we're all doing it ourselves, and you're not making room for the Holy Spirit to work. Mm-hmm. It's not about us. It's not about us selling something to consumers out there. It's about the Holy Spirit touching people's hearts, and that's the focus we need. Now, there's lots of ways you can do that, and I am a big advocate for multiple worship styles. We have a traditional worship here. We have a contemporary worship here. I love them both. Me
too.
So I really do. And I think some of the people that see me the contemporary might, be shocked sometimes they see me singing some of these traditional hymns. I love some. How Great Thou Art is one of my favorite songs ever. I love that song. Carrie Underwood sings a great version of that, by the way.
She does.
Doesn't she, though?
Yes.
That's phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
But getting to what Sean was saying here about, the vetting of staff. And I do think that we need to make sure the people in our leadership have the right attitude towards what worship is supposed to be, or we're going to start to see. And so that's what I'm more worried about. When this getting back to this story, that Mr. Kinnaman talks about, finances declining and all of that. And while, yes, I get that, part of me, when I read that, I'm like, okay, but since when is that an indicator of what's going to happen with the church? Because that still seems to me to almost be looking at it from a human perspective. What's God going to do? I mean, I've seen plenty of examples throughout this pandemic where we've looked at the finances and thought, how are we going to come up with the money for that? And then God did something, and it happened, So I'm not as worried about finances and things like that. People call me stupid, whatever. I'm just not. That doesn't concern me as much. And that's saying something for a guy whose paycheck comes from the church, okay? But that just doesn't concern me as much. What I'm more concerned about is the spiritual aspects. And like you're saying, people not coming back to church, which raises the question of why were you here in the first place? If churches are going to decline and churches are going to close, I see that being the reason more than anything else, because they're not putting God first.
Yeah. Something that my husband has really taught me well in, I feel like God has really given him a very clear and consistent perspective when it comes to worship, is he talks a lot and consistently, and we'll come home on Sunday mornings and we'll talk about worship, and he'll often ask me, he'll say, Jessica, did I give my most excellent service to the Lord today? And using the word excellent rather than perfect or professional or, other adjectives. He consistently uses the word excellent. And
is he a Bill and Ted's fan growing up by any chance? Sorry.
Probably.
Excellent. Sorry.
I mean, we'll have to ask him. You'll have to ask him next week when he comes. But what he has talked a lot about.
Spoiler alert: Ryan's going to be co-hosting next week. Hadn't announced that yet.
My apologies.
That's all right.
My short-term memory, I told you. But what he talks about is the difference. It's a fine line, but it's a really important line when it comes to worship, where if you're, participating in worship in the congregation or one of the leaders in a worship experience, what it means to bring, excellence to the table because God is worthy of it. God is worthy of us giving our very best. And excellent doesn't mean, it can mean very different things depending, did you give your very best, and did you work to arrive in this place to give worship to the Lord in your best posture, whatever that means, So, and it goes to like the night before where he said, I'm going to bed, so that I can be rested and excellent tomorrow. Not for it to be a product and not for it to be, flawless and perfect, because, I agree with you when we're going to hold so tightly to what it means for, all of my plans to come out and for it to be something that's going to be a presentation, that's where, Satan can really have a field day. But what does it mean to prepare and to arrive with the opportunity for God to move and for you to give your very best and excellent worship for the Lord?
Well, I think Ryan is very wise, and the wisest thing I heard you say was that he gets to bed so that he can be excellent tomorrow, which if we don't wrap up this show, neither of us will be able to do. So
I do want to point out
I want to go to bed.
Yeah, I know. Okay, dude. One of the, just to sort of piggyback on what Ryan was saying, is one of the things we told our kids, and Ken has alluded to it before in the show, is that we've all been involved, all of our family, in drama at one point or another.
She's talking theatrical drama, not like life
drama.
Okay. I mean, we've had that too. Don't get me wrong.
The other kind of drama, but I'm talking about theater in particular. Is that we always tell them you're performing for an audience of one. Mm-hmm. And so that's, some people refer to God as the author of all. I've always referred to him as my audience of one. So everything I do is for my audience of one. And so I want to do a good job for him, right? So
we will have to bring that up next week when Ryan is co-hosting the show, as Jess spoiled for us here earlier.
You already knew that?
Because I know that he has, I've slipped up a few times when we're talking about our online viewers on the worship service, and I've talked about the online audience. And I know he does not like to use the word audience when speaking of worship because it creates that, consumer concert type feel as opposed to congregation. He's very diligent. At least he has been around me. I don't know. You're married to him, so I'd be asking you've probably heard this before. He's very much, congregation, not audience. So I'm curious how he would feel about the term audience of one if your audience is God. We'll have to ask him that next week. So anyway, thank you all very much. Thank you.
Tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned for McAllister Part 2. For those that didn't figure it out, if you're completely clueless at this point, next week, Ben is still out of town. He'll be out of town next week. And so we are going to be joined by Ryan McAllister. I probably could have asked you for 2 weeks in a row, but I thought that was a little unfair. So we took second string, and we're bringing in
You had varsity today. Next week it'll be
JV next week. No, but it's okay.
Not at all.
When varsity is as good as this, JV's not so bad, right? Exactly. So thank you very much. Seriously, Jess, for coming on.
Thank you for having me. It was a joy and an honor to be here. Thank you.
And we do want to thank everybody out there that was watching with us today, especially those of you who commented and participated in the show. We really do appreciate it because, well, lets us know somebody's watching. But also, you know, we don't necessarily always like to just listen to ourselves talk this long. It's nice to interact with some folks out there. And, you know, hey, if you got questions, like Jess was saying, you got questions, ask them, you know, and that's to whatever extent we can here on this live program. We want to be able to answer them. Jeanette Harrington, you did this to me once before, Jeanette. It's like, as I'm thanking people for commenting, Jeanette comments. And that's just like, you're like illustrating my point. Thank you, Jeanette. Her comment was, thank you and have a blessed evening. You too. And thank you, and you have a blessed evening.
You too.
And thank you back there. And you, oh, by the way, I should say this. I got to call her out because we always did when my daughter was here. You know, my wife, Mary Kay, is the producer of the show. And there's a little question about whether or not she's going to be able to be here doing it next week. We don't know for sure yet. And so we have the very talented Lisa Koger, who has been part of our video ministry team for some time now. She helps filming a lot of the worship services on the weekends. She's been looming over Mary Kay's shoulder during some of those worship services, looking at the video switching equipment and everything. And she's been learning some of the ropes today. And she's going to take a more active role, we'll say, next week in next week's program. So if for some reason we don't get on the air, don't be too hard on her. We all love her. So sorry. But thank you, Lisa, as well, for being willing to come out. We really do appreciate it. So, and thank you to my son, who's been back there playing on his video games the whole time, staying quiet. So, all right, that's it. Thanks, everybody. Don't forget, Wednesdays at 5:30 is our new time. Make sure you tune in. See you next week. God bless.